That was a few years ago when it was a home invasion incident here in Brookings, where an individual was breaking into a house. Unfortunately, and as tragically as it was, thought he was in his own home and thought he was being locked out. So he was very frustrated at the time. And the individual who lived there was in fear of his life and made it known that he had a firearm and that he should not enter, and that he was calling the police. In this particular case, this individual continued on to break into the house, which ultimately put the homeowner in fear of his life and reacted in the way that he did. You know, certainly firearms are a part of our culture and our way of life here in the United States, and people do have the right under the Castle Doctrine to protect themselves in their own home. You know, background checks are very important. I think we can do a lot more in that area, you know, especially when we talk about people who are either mentally ill or suffer from other problems, social problems. But again, that becomes very difficult because people do have civil rights and liberties in order to possess firearms in this country. And so it makes it difficult for law enforcement or those that are in the decision-making process. For example, anyone could apply for a pistol permit, and a pistol permit is actually a license to carry concealed. A lot of people believe that a pistol permit means that's their permit or license just to have a handgun, but anyone can own a handgun. That permit is what delineates between carrying it concealed or carrying it out in the open, and so there is a misconception there. But during that process of that application process, law enforcement does do a background check, and they do look at certain criteria whether or not this person should have or possess a pistol permit or a license to carry concealed. You know, I think we do all we can as far as the background with criminal history. That's pretty extensive, but it's fairly easy to do for law enforcement to check people out and make sure that they are, number one, that they don't have a felony record or a crime of violence where they cannot possess a firearm, let alone get a permit. I think where the problem becomes is with those who are on the fringe that maybe have experienced some social problems or mental problems in the past, and how do you make that determination on who should get one and who should not? And I know this is something that we in law enforcement struggle with because individuals do have a certain right, and you don't want to pigeonhole somebody for their entire life because of one past mistake, but yet it's a big responsibility to make that determination. Certainly I think we can go farther if the law allows it, and I think that's something that belongs to a lot of our legislators, whether it's federally or on the state level, that would give law enforcement a little more latitude, or in our case it's the sheriff who actually issues the permits in Brookings County, and that used to be shared with the chief, but now it's solely on the shoulders of the sheriff, and so it's a big responsibility, and he does have the latitude to make those decisions at his own discretion, but it can be a challenge. And he could do that, but again, that could be challenged, and I don't know what recourse that person has. The sheriff has the ultimate say in the county, and if he feels that there's too much risk involved with that individual possessing, he's going to make that decision.
Is really the whole background check limited to a person's legal background?
It's not limited to that. The background check, number one, consists of any criminal history. And then beyond that, I think if we've had any contacts with this individual, whether it's dealt with domestic violence or any assaults, whether they're convicted or not, just the local knowledge that we have of our citizens. And again, the sheriff, not I, we don't know everyone in our community, but we do have a sense of those who have been in and out of trouble and those that would be a concern, a risk to the community. So, all those things play a factor. I know that there have been some that have been denied based on that, not just on any criminal history, but on the fact that they have been threatening in the past. And we don't think it's prudent to allow those individuals to have firearms. Now, can we block that entirely? Absolutely not, because as I've explained earlier, that you can still possess a firearm as long as you don't have a felony crime of violence record. It just means that you're not going to get a permit for concealed carry. Which raises the question then, can we go farther?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think we can. I don't have any problem with an expanded gun control, because a lot of times in what we have now, I think some people view it as we're just taking the guns out of the hands of honest and law-abiding citizens, and those that are not law-abiding are still going to find a way to possess a firearm. And that's true. But at least if there are other laws that are passed in that possession of a firearm and their ability to have a firearm, we at least have got some tools at hand, just as we do for traffic offenses. You can't be everywhere all the time and catch everything. But at least we've got something at our disposal that we can utilize. So if we do come across an individual who possesses, who should not be, then we've got something that we can act upon. The background check can be done nationwide. So it's not just locally, and that can be done via the computer, and can be done rather quickly. And if we want more information on anything that pops up in their history, we can contact that local agency, because that information is there, to find out if we want more information on that particular incident. Because we may have someone that has a criminal history, may not be serious, and that person may seem to be okay, but if we've got any questions, which I've done that with prospective employees, to go back and ask, tell me a little bit more about this, because I don't want to take any chances here with this individual. So again, we have that latitude to do that, and the discrimination by the sheriff then to issue permits is there. Currently, I know the legislature is looking at the Sentinel Bill, which would allow the local school districts to hire or arm staff that they already have in the schools, and that kind of there's mixed reaction because of what that can bring. I know that there are some schools, small schools, that are very isolated, that they don't have a quick response. They're kind of on their own, and I understand that. With a lot of our larger schools, I know in our own district, that bill is not favored. It's not favored by me in my office, just based on the fact that we think we've got a good system here, and we just soon keep the firearms and those to respond to any emergencies in the hands of the professionals. Certainly if the school districts want to hire professionals to be in their schools, I could support that, where they're properly trained. But who's going to conduct that training? Who's going to determine that they are the right individuals for that job? And right now, the hired professionals are done by people like myself who have been in the field for many, many years, and where there's not just background checks, but also psychological evaluations. We don't want police officers running around in our community that have mental issues or problems. We want the best of the best that we can get, and know when to exercise that particular use of force and the prudent way to do that. Are we going to have that with a janitor or a teacher? Are we going to have custodians or teachers that are going to want to carry that liability and that responsibility? Or is it something that's going to be a burden to them, and all of a sudden now, instead of wearing that firearm, it's being locked away in a drawer, which becomes another hazard and a risk. Our teachers are meant to teach, and I think by and large, most school districts, school boards, supervisors, principals, superintendents are all going to agree that the teachers are meant to teach, and that something like this should be left in the hands of the professionals. I think there's a lot more that we can do. I think the point of entry in our schools, certainly this means that there's going to have to be some money dedicated, whether it's locally, by the state, or federally, to protect our schools and places of public like that at the point of entry. Let's make the point of entry the difficulty. In the last case with Sandy Hook, they had done, I think, everything that they could do, except the glass was not shatterproof. And that can be a very inexpensive fix with glass that's not shatterproof. You might still be able to shoot through it. It doesn't have to be expensive bulletproof glass, but can be glass that you are going to have to break out and break out and break out. In other words, take some time to make that entry, which allows the school, even if there's not law enforcement nearby, where they can evacuate the school and get everyone away and out of harm. So I think there's other alternatives. Certainly this whole issue with violence in our schools, it's a multi-pronged way of attacking that. It's being aware of the problem child or the people in your community, which law enforcement has that. We're fortunate here in Brookings that we have a school resource officer who really has the sensitivity on problems and issues in our schools. I wish I had more that could be there. That certainly is an advantage, and there's other schools that can't afford that. But I think being attuned to what's going on in school and some of the kids that are having difficulties, we can head something off at the pass before anything really bad happens, and we've proven that time and time again with our school resource officer. Again, the point of entry, I think knowing where our weak spots are and taking the steps to make it more difficult for not just a student. You know, oftentimes we looked at students that were the problem. Well, as we've seen with Sandy Hook, it could be anyone that can make entry. So we have to examine our points of entry and determine where are our weak spots and take the steps to make those changes. And then by and large, what the Brookings Police Department has done is exercise rapid deployment exercises. And this is just simply, we don't depend on our SWAT team to be initiated, but we depend on the people, because if there's a problem in a school, who is going to get deployed? Who's going to go there? It's going to be the chief on down that's going to go and have to be there right away. And so everyone from the chief on down in our department trains for rapid deployment, active shooter. So at a moment's notice, I can pick up, I can jump in my vehicle, and I can head to the school. And we're all trained as to how we're going to attack that threat. So I think that's important. Again, not every school can do that, but I think there's other things and other alternatives they can do, short of arming citizens or teachers to be the protectors in our school. Is that too lengthy?
Well, no, we can.
You can always add it.
We can get it down to
okay.
that. Oh, that's good though. No, that's perfect stuff.
But that's kind of my canned thing about, you know, when we talk about, you know, and I've had other legislators that have asked me about what's my opinion here. And in fact, you know, at a local chiefs association meeting with the governor, and he was asking for recommendations on where we stood on gun control and providing a better security for our schools. And I was one of those that spoke up, and those were my same points to him. And I think that's kind of how everyone feels. You know, we can always do more with background checks and issuing permits, and we can do more in the way of school security. And yes, it's going to cost money. But arming the custodians and the teachers is the cheap fix. It's not necessarily the right fix. You know, it's funny, and I think no matter what size of community, when I visit with other chiefs around the state, we all have a pretty good idea who some of the problem individuals are, people that we are concerned about and would certainly be concerned about for them to having a firearm. And so that helps. I think that helps, and to have law enforcement work more closely with the schools or with the mental health care individuals certainly is an advantage. And you know, heaven forbid that anything would happen in the state of South Dakota, but I think we still do a pretty good job overall in paying attention to these types of things. I think that's the key. You know, not just to have law enforcement paying attention, but also to have that collaboration with our citizens, and that if they know something, to not be silent about it and to let somebody know, whether it's law enforcement or if it's a counselor, so that that person can get help and that these types of things don't pop up unnoticed or unexpected.
After those happen, you always say, yeah, he always was kind of weird.
Yeah, you always get that, and it's we've had that in cases which really was unfortunate, because we had that with the one of the traffic accidents that we had here on West 6th Street, and that individual was not normally in this condition, and for him to go off the deep end was noticed a week prior, and people had some contact with him, and if they'd only said something to somebody, maybe we could have averted that tragedy. I guess the only thing I would say is that for our citizens, if they have a concern, if they're worried about something, don't hesitate to contact law enforcement and voice that concern, to at least give us an idea, because we do depend on other people. We can't be everywhere. We don't know everything that goes on in our community. And so when I talk about that collaboration with law enforcement, it doesn't necessarily mean someone has to get arrested. It just means that we can point them in the right direction to get them help as well. And that's what we're all about. You can always call Crime Stoppers, because that's anonymous. But again, you can still call the police department and say, I really don't want my name used here. There's an individual that I know about that I'm really worried about, and I don't want him to get in trouble, but I think someone needs to talk to him. And certainly we can do that. We can reach out and try to help someone before it goes too far. Well, and the other concern is that, okay, so we arm a teacher or a custodian in that school. How do I know who they are when we get there? That they're not the bad guy, and they're not taking a risk because they're out there, they're shooting at somebody. And how do I know? In the smaller communities, you probably do know who everybody is. But I don't know every teacher by face if I'm going to show up there. So there's some real problems with that notion of arming a teacher. And that's not what they're there for. They're there to teach and to bring our children along, and not there's certain things they can do as protectors when they do lockdown drills, and they do lockdown drills here in our schools. Those are things that they need to do and understand and practice. And that's another thing, that some of these smaller schools don't do lockdown drills. They're not mandated by the state. We've asked for that. We've asked for that mandate by the state to do mandated just like they do with fire drills. I mean, why not? If you look at how many fires there are in a school versus how many shootings we get. Where's the assessment there on risk? And I would state that there's probably right now there's a lot more risk to violence in our schools than there are fires. Schools are regularly inspected for fire safety. But how often are the schools regularly inspected for security and personal safety of the staff and the students? So here I go talking again, but
that's
but it's true. Our schools do it, even though it's not mandated here in Brookings. So that's fortunate that they take this seriously. But there's other schools that do not. Maybe that will change.
Who came up with the idea to do those? Was this something that came out of the department or the schools?
The lockdown drills, I guess I really can't say if that was something that was, I know our school resource officer really pushed hard for that, and I think in light of what has happened in the recent years from Columbine all the way up to current, that's changed attitudes. Since Columbine, the way we react is totally different. Back before Columbine, we would go in with a SWAT team, and it was slow and it was methodical. Why? Because that's the way we trained. We didn't have such incidents where we had to go to the immediate threat. Rapid deployment, an active shooter, is going to that immediate threat wherever you hear it or see it. You're not waiting to go through room by room. You're going immediately to that threat. And that's very important. And that's changed for every agency in law enforcement today. But we still have this, that we have to call out the SWAT team mentality, and that's got to go away as well, because we can't wait. We can't wait. Our school resource officer we have one, Officer Joe Fischbacher, again, who I've said is very well attuned to what happens in our schools. But he's only one person. He can't be everywhere. Like I said, I wished I had more. And staffing is always a concern for us. And a lot of schools that can't afford to have a school resource officer, and I say the schools don't fund our officer. It's paid for by the city of Brookings. But that's why in a lot of places why the DARE program exists. The DARE program, which was initiated for drug awareness and education, does two things. Yes, it does that, but it also provides an officer in those schools at least at some point during the school year. So we have both. We have the school resource officer and we have a DARE officer. So Officer Joe tries to get to every school because we have quite a few elementary schools at least once a week. Is that often enough? Perhaps not. Most of his time is going to be in the risk areas that we consider, which would be the middle school or the high school. And that's where he focuses most of his time.